A shark that swims slower than you walk is eating seals, not scavenging them, eating them. Picture a 4-meter body drifting through water barely above freezing, tail beating once every few seconds, both eyes hung with parasites, half blind in permanent dark. Everything about it says harmless. The stomachs say otherwise. And the easy answer, that it finds the dead, collapses the moment you look at what comes out of those stomachs. The real explanation is stranger. Its flesh is poisonous, and the poison is keeping it alive. It may have been swimming before your country existed. Start with the hunt. Somewhere off the coast of Greenland, a ringed seal is sleeping in open water. That sounds like a mistake. It isn't. Seals sleep in the water on purpose, because the ice above them belongs to polar bears, and a bear will take a seal at a breathing hole without much effort at all. So the seal drifts, eyes shut, a few meters down, in water hovering near the freezing point. It has picked the safer of two bad options, and then something moves in underneath it that the seal never evolved to fear because it does not behave like a threat. It barely behaves like an animal. The Greenland shark does not charge. It does not accelerate. It comes up the way a piece of the seafloor would come up if the seafloor could drift. A dark gray body, blunt-nosed, thick as a barrel, tail swinging with the rhythm of something half asleep itself. If you filmed it and played the footage back at normal speed, people would assume you had slowed it down. Here is the part that should not work. This animal is one of the slowest fish anyone has ever measured. Not slow for a shark, slow for anything with muscles. When researchers have attached motion sensors to Greenland sharks and let them go, the numbers that come back are almost embarrassing. A cruising pace somewhere around 1 kilometer an hour, and a tail stroke that takes several seconds to complete from one side to the other. Read that again. Several seconds. Your heartbeat is faster than this animal's tail. A person walking down a hallway, not hurrying, going to get a glass of water, is moving faster than an adult Greenland shark traveling through its own home. Now put a seal in front of it. A ringed seal is a torpedo. It swims for a living. It turns on nothing. And even a startled, half-awake seal can leave that shark behind in a single second and never think about it again. There is no chase here. There is no contest. On paper, this is a predator that could not catch its prey if the prey were asleep, injured, and pointed in the wrong direction. And yet, cut open the stomachs of Greenland sharks, which people have been doing for a very long time because these sharks were hunted for centuries, and seals keep showing up. Not occasionally, regularly. In some sampled groups, seal remains turn up in a real share of the stomachs examined. Fish too, squid, but seals, again and again, inside an animal that moves like a slow leak. So the obvious answer arrives, and it arrives fast, and it is the one almost everybody reaches for first. It doesn't hunt them. It finds them. The Arctic kills a lot of animals. Seals die of injury, of illness, of orcas, of hunters, of bad luck. And when they die, most of them sink. The deep water is a delivery system. A dead seal drops through the dark until it lands, and something has to be down there to clean it up. A shark that costs almost nothing to run, that can hang in black water for months waiting for a meal, is exactly the animal you would design for that job. It has an enormous nose. It lives in cold, that keeps a carcass worth eating long after warmer water would have ruined it. Scavenging isn't a downgrade. In an ocean this empty, scavenging is a career. And it would explain the rest of the animal, the lack of urgency, the lack of speed. A body that looks designed by something that had never heard of hurrying. If your food falls out of the sky on no schedule at all, patience is not a personality. It is the only strategy that pays. That explanation is clean. It fits the speed. It held up for a long time, and it was never a stupid idea. It just had one problem it could not get past. Some of the seals were fresh, not decomposed, not picked down to scraps, intact enough to raise a question. And on some of them, the damage looked wrong for a carcass. Clean bites, missing sections. The kind of removal that suggests something took a piece out of a living animal rather than working over a dead one. A body on the seafloor gets attention from everything down there, and it shows. Fresh seal inside a shark means the seal met the shark before anything else did. That is where this stops being a story about a slow fish and starts being a problem, because now you need to explain how an animal that cannot outswim a swimming seal keeps ending up with seals inside it. And this is where honesty matters more than drama. Nobody has filmed a Greenland shark killing a healthy seal. That footage does not exist. What exists is a body, a set of stomach contents, a set of movement measurements, and an ecosystem, and people trying to build a plausible bridge between them. The leading idea is uncomfortable in the best possible way. The shark isn't chasing seals, it's finding them asleep. Remember why the seal was in the water. It went there to escape a predator it could recognize, something with a shape and a rhythm and a history millions of years long. The water was supposed to be the safer choice. Sleeping in open water means switching off the thing that keeps you alive, and it works, as long as nothing in that water can reach you before you wake up. A Greenland shark moves at roughly a walking pace. A sleeping seal moves at 0. That changes the whole equation. Speed only matters relative to the target. Against an awake seal, this shark is a joke. Against an unconscious one, it doesn't need speed at all. It needs to arrive without waking it up. And that may be exactly what this body is built to do. Watch the stroke again. One slow beat every few seconds. That is not just a slow animal. That is an animal producing almost no pressure wave, almost no turbulence, almost no sound. Aquatic animals feel a predator coming partly through the water it shoves ahead of itself. A fast body announces its arrival before it arrives. This one barely disturbs anything. It is quiet in the most literal, physical sense. It makes very little water move, and it does not need long. This is a large shark, 4 meters, 5, sometimes more, heavier than the seal by a wide margin. With a mouth built to take a section out of something rather than swallow it whole. It does not have to win a fight. It has to close the last meter before the seal's body registers that the water has changed. One bite ends the argument. That is the first reversal in this story, and it deserves a moment. The slowness might not be a handicap the shark works around. The slowness might be the weapon. Careful, though. That is a hypothesis, not a filmed fact, and the difference matters. It is possible the sharks are taking sick seals, injured seals, animals already caught in nets or already dying. It is possible different groups behave differently in different places. It is possible we are looking at a scavenger that occasionally gets lucky and we have flattered it into a hunter. The evidence supports the ambush idea. It does not close the case. Keep that door open because it stays open for the rest of this story. Even the cautious version leaves you with something strange. Whether it ambushes sleeping seals or simply arrives first at dying ones, the Greenland shark is winning a game it should not be able to enter. Wrong shape, wrong speed, wrong temperature for predation as we normally define it. And something in that should bother you. Slowness isn't free. A predator that cannot accelerate has almost no room for error. Miss once, and there is no second lunge. Get it wrong and the meal is gone for good. That is a terrible way to make a living, unless missing barely costs you anything. Unless your body burns so little fuel that a failed hunt does not register. Unless you can afford to try, fail, drift, and try again next month. And the month after that, without ever being in trouble, which flips the question completely. The real mystery was never how a slow shark catches a fast seal. Ambush handles that, more or less, with the uncertainty left in? The mystery is why this animal is slow in the first place. Why an ocean predator would give up the one thing nearly every other shark on Earth has invested everything in. Speed is the entire Mako design. Speed is the great white. Speed is what a shark is supposed to be. This one surrendered it. And it did not get weaker, it got bigger, tougher, and older than almost anything else on the planet with a backbone. Something in this water made that trade worth taking. It wasn't the seals, it wasn't the darkness, it was the cold. And the cold is not the backdrop of this story. It's the machine. Go back to that seal for a second, and then keep going down. Past the underside of the ice, past the last of the blue. The temperature does not crash the way you might expect, because it does not have far to fall. It is already there. In much of the water this shark uses, the number sits somewhere between about -1 and 4 degrees Celsius, and it stays there. Not for a season. Always. There is no summer at 400 meters. There is no warm afternoon. The Arctic deep is one long, unbroken cold that has been running since before anything you would recognize as history. Most people file that under scenery. Cold water, dark water, ice, atmosphere. Something the animal has to put up with? That is the wrong way around. And it is the single most important mistake you can make about this shark. Here is the thing nobody tells you about the ocean. The warm part is the exception. The sunlit bathwater surface you have swum in is a thin film on top of a planet that is, by volume, cold and dark, and always has been. Most of the water on Earth is a few degrees above freezing. Life down there is not enduring the cold. Life down there is normal, and we are the strange ones, running around at 37 degrees, burning fuel every second of every day just to keep a number from dropping, because that is what temperature actually is, biologically. It is not a feeling. It is a speed limit. Every muscle contraction, every nerve signal, every scrap of digestion is chemistry. And chemistry runs on heat. Warm it up, and reactions accelerate. Cool it down, and they slow. The rough rule of thumb in biology is that dropping about 10 degrees can cut the pace of those reactions roughly in half, sometimes more. Now compare a shark's muscle in tropical water at 28 degrees with the same tissue sitting at 1 degree, and stop thinking of it as the same machine. It isn't. It is the same machine with the power supply turned down. So the answer to the last chapter looks easy. Why is the Greenland shark slow? Because it is cold. Cold muscle is slow muscle. Case closed, no mystery, move on. Except that leaves the shark as a victim. A poor, freezing animal, doing its best in a bad neighborhood, too chilled to swim properly. And that picture falls apart the moment you look at what other sharks in cold water actually do. They cheat. Look at the mako, the porbeagle, the salmon shark, which hunts in water cold enough to hurt, the great white. These animals figured out a way around the speed limit, and the way they did it is one of the better pieces of engineering in the ocean. Inside their bodies is a dense weave of blood vessels, arteries, and veins packed together so tightly that warm blood coming out of the swimming muscles dumps its heat into the cold blood coming back in before that heat can reach the gills and be lost to the sea. Heat gets trapped, recycled. It stays in the muscle instead of leaking out into the water. The result is a shark carrying its own furnace. Muscle several degrees warmer than the ocean around it, sometimes considerably more. Warm muscle contracts faster. Faster muscle means acceleration, means pursuit, means catching things that are trying very hard not to be caught. A salmon shark can move through near-freezing water like an animal in a completely different ocean, because internally, it is. So the solution exists. It has existed in shark bodies for millions of years. It is sitting right there in the same cold water. The Greenland shark did not take it. It has no furnace. Its body temperature is the water's temperature. Whatever the sea is, it is. Down at 1 degree, its heart, its muscle, its gut, its brain are all running at 1 degree, and it makes no attempt to fix that. And once you know the warm-blooded option was available, it's slow because it's cold. Stops being an explanation and turns into a question. Why would you refuse the upgrade? Because a furnace is not free. It is a subscription, and the bill never stops. Heat leaks. Water pulls warmth out of a body far faster than air does, which is why cold water is dangerous to you in minutes, and cold air is dangerous in hours. Any animal generating internal heat in the sea is pouring energy into a container with a hole in it, permanently, whether or not it has eaten. A salmon shark has to keep feeding, to keep burning. Its speed is real, but it is rented, and the rent is due every single day. Now ask what that costs in the Arctic deep. Food down there does not arrive on a schedule. There are no shoals of anything hanging around a black seafloor waiting to be eaten. Meals come as accidents. Something dies up above and falls. Something sick drifts within reach. Something sleeping does not wake up. You cannot plan around any of it. And in a place where food is unpredictable, the most dangerous thing you can own is a body that demands to be fed. That is the reversal. And it is the whole animal in one line. Cold is not the tax on this shark. Cold is the budget. A body running at 1 degree burns almost nothing. Its energy demand is so low that the arithmetic of its life stops looking like other predators. It does not need to eat often. It does not need to eat well. A missed hunt is not a crisis. It is a Tuesday. Where a warm-bodied predator has to keep winning just to stay solvent, this one can lose for a very long time and still be fine. The best available evidence points to a metabolic rate at the extreme low end for a fish of that size, which means the gap between meals can stretch out in a way that would kill almost anything else. Slowness is what that budget buys, not a symptom, a purchase. Picture the two designs side by side. The salmon shark is a heater with teeth, throwing energy at the water to rent a few seconds of violence. The Greenland shark is closer to a battery left on standby, a huge gray mass idling at almost no cost at all, waiting the ocean out. One of them is spectacular. The other one is still there after the spectacular one has had to eat again and again and again. And the cold buys more than patience. Once you turn everything down, you have to notice what else runs on the same dial. Growth is chemistry. Repair is chemistry. Damage accumulating in tissue is chemistry. Turn the temperature down and you are not just slowing the tail, you are slowing the whole animal, including the parts of it that decide how fast it falls apart. Hold that thought. It becomes the strangest fact in this entire story later, and it starts here at 1 degree in the dark. There is a physical problem hiding in this, though, and it deserves a flag. Seawater at that depth can sit below the freezing point of fresh water. Cells are mostly water. A fish holding station in that, for centuries, in permanent cold, is doing something that should not be casually possible, and the answer is not anatomy. It is chemistry. This shark's tissue is loaded with compounds that keep its proteins working when cold and pressure would otherwise wreck them. And those compounds are the reason its flesh will put a human being on the floor. We are coming back to that. It is worse and more interesting than it sounds. For now, sit with what the cold has actually done to this animal. It took away speed, and it did not replace it. It removed the option of the chase. It made this shark permanently incapable of the one move every predator you can name relies on. And in exchange, it handed over something no fast shark has: the ability to keep existing when there is nothing to eat, month after month, in a place that offers almost nothing. That is the trade. Power for duration, winning for lasting, which creates the next problem, and it is not a small one. Patience only works if something eventually shows up in front of you. Cold buys you time, but time does not find food. Time does not tell you a seal is asleep 40 meters away, or that a carcass just landed in the dark 2 kilometers east. Something in this body has to locate the meal, or the low budget is just a slow way to starve, so you go looking for the sensor, you look for the eyes. And the eyes are the point where most people stop being impressed by this shark and start being disturbed by it. Because on a huge share of these animals, the eyes are not empty, not damaged, not blind in any ordinary way. They are occupied. Bring the camera in close, closer than you want. The eye of a Greenland shark is small, for the size of the animal, set into that blunt gray head like something added as an afterthought. And hanging out of it, anchored into the surface of the eye itself, is a worm-shaped thing a few centimeters long, pale, swaying slightly with the water, sometimes trailing 2 long strings behind it. Those strings are eggs. It has a name, Omatocoida elongata, and it is not a worm. It is a copepod, a crustacean, distant kin to the specks of plankton that fill the sea. This one has given up drifting for a very specific career. The female finds the eye of a Greenland shark, grips the cornea, and burrows in and stays. The part you can see is only the flag. Underneath it, the parasite has hooked itself into living tissue and settled down, feeding on the surface of the eye it is standing on, dropping egg strings into the water so the next generation can go and do the same thing to another shark. Under a working light, it looks like a mistake in the footage. A gray wall of shark slides past the camera, and there, in the middle of that face, is a pale strand waving off the eyeball, drifting with the current, while the eye behind it does not move at all. People seeing it for the first time usually assume the animal is injured. It isn't injured, it's furnished. Now the number that changes how you feel about it. This is not a rare tragedy. It is not one unlucky animal filmed once. In sampled groups of Greenland sharks in some regions, the great majority carry these parasites. Not some, most. Often on both eyes. Pull 100 sharks out of that water, and the ones without a copepod in the face are the anomaly. Sit with that, a large predator, one of the biggest fish in the Arctic, and the standard configuration for the species includes something eating its eyes. The obvious read is horror. This is a ruined animal, dragging itself around half-blind in freezing water, too pathetic to defend even its own face. It is scavenging because it can't see well enough to hunt. It is slow because it doesn't know where it's going. That reading is wrong. And it is wrong in a way that tells you almost everything about how this shark works. Start with the explanation you have probably heard, because it is the one that spread. The story goes that the parasite glows, that it acts as a lure dangling in front of the shark's eye, drawing curious prey close enough to be taken. A deal. The copepod gets a home, the shark gets a fishing light on its face. Horror becomes partnership, and everybody goes home happy. It is a great story. The evidence for it is thin. The bioluminescence at the center of that idea has not been established for this parasite. It gets repeated because it is satisfying, not because it was demonstrated. And the deeper problem is the logic. If you wanted a lure, you would not put it on your own eye, blocking the sensor, out of reach of your own mouth, on an animal that cannot turn quickly enough to snap at something floating beside its own head. The lure idea solves an emotional problem, not a biological one. It exists because we cannot accept the alternative. The alternative is worse and far more interesting. The parasite may cost the shark almost nothing, not because it isn't doing damage. It is. It scars the cornea, and the vision of a heavily infested shark is very likely degraded, possibly severely. The point is that the thing being damaged was never worth much down here in the first place. Think about where this animal lives. Go a few hundred meters down in the Arctic, and the light is effectively gone. Not dim. Gone. There is no dawn there, no shadow, no shape moving against a bright surface. Whatever your eyes are, they have nothing to work with. And under the ice in winter, up in the shallow water, the sun is not exactly generous either. This shark spends its life in a place where the entire concept of seeing is close to useless most of the time. So what has actually happened to that eye? Evolution does not maintain equipment that isn't paying rent. Eyes are expensive. They need blood, nerve tissue, brain space, protection, repair. Any animal living permanently in the dark is under pressure to stop spending on vision. And lineage after lineage in the deep sea has done exactly that. Shrinking eyes, simplifying them, dropping them entirely. The Greenland shark did not go all the way. It kept eyes that appear built for very low light, the kind that might pull something useful out of near darkness. Faint movement, faint contrast, a shape where there should not be one. But it clearly did not invest in protecting them. And that is the tell. Here is the reversal. The parasite is not a sign that this animal is broken. It is a receipt showing what this animal decided vision was worth. If the eye mattered, the copepod would be a catastrophe, and selection would have handled it long ago through immune response, through behavior, through anatomy. Fish deal with parasites constantly. Many hold still at cleaning stations and let smaller animals pick them clean. Some scrape against surfaces. Some simply move fast enough and far enough that infestation stays rare. This shark can do none of that. It has no hands. It cannot reach its own face. It cannot outswim anything, including a copepod larva drifting in the water column. It has no cleaner species queuing up in the black water at 400 meters. Because there is no cleaning station down there, because there is barely anything down there at all. Slowness bought this animal an enormous fuel budget, and the bill arrived here, on its eyes, in the form of something it cannot shake off. And spare a thought for the copepod, because it is solving the same puzzle the shark is. To complete its life cycle, it has to release larvae into an ocean that is mostly nothing. And those larvae have to find, somewhere in all that black water, the eye of one particular kind of shark. The odds should be hopeless. That most of these sharks carry the parasite anyway tells you either the copepod is extraordinarily good at this, or that Greenland sharks are less scattered than we assume, or both. Nobody has watched it happen. It is one more thing about this animal where we can measure the result without ever seeing the process. And it still did not matter enough to change. That is the uncomfortable part. The shark is not tolerating the parasite because it is noble or tough. It is tolerating it because losing sharp vision in that environment is roughly equivalent to losing a feature you are not using. The infestation is permanent, generational, and species-wide, and the animal on the other end of it is enormous, ancient, and doing fine. Damage without cost is not really damage. It is just a fact about the body. Careful, though, because this is one of the places where the confident version outruns the evidence. Nobody has run a Greenland shark through a vision test. We do not know exactly how much sight an infested shark retains, or whether some individuals are functionally blind, while others are not. There are observations of these sharks reacting to lights and to the presence of vessels, which suggests vision is not zero and may still be doing something, particularly in shallower, dimmer water rather than total dark. The honest statement is narrower than the dramatic one. The eye is compromised, the compromise appears survivable, and we cannot yet say precisely where on that scale any individual animal sits, which leaves you exactly where the last chapter left you, only now the hole is bigger. You have an animal that runs at the temperature of the water, that moves at a walking pace, that can go long stretches without eating, and that is, at minimum, badly visually impaired, in a place with nothing to see anyway. Cold gave it patience. Fine. Patience is not detection. Something still has to tell this shark that a seal is asleep above it, or that a body just landed in the dark a kilometer away, or that anything at all in this enormous volume of black water is worth swimming toward. It is not going to be the eyes, so the sensor is somewhere else. And to understand what it is, you have to stop imagining the ocean as a place you look at. Start imagining it as a place you smell. Because in the deep, information does not travel as light, it travels as chemistry, drifting on currents, thinning out over kilometers, arriving hours after the thing that released it is already dead. And the Greenland shark's real hunting organ is not in its head the way you think it is the head. Try to picture the actual size of the problem because nobody ever does. Take a single cubic kilometer of Arctic water at 400 meters. Black, cold, still, no floor in sight, no surface in sight. Now count what is in it that a large shark could eat. On an average day, in an average patch, the honest answer is close to nothing. A few fish scattered through a volume that could swallow a city. The deep ocean is not a jungle. It is a desert with weather. That is the environment this animal has to make a living in. And it changes what the word hunting even means. Because your instinct says hunting is searching. Cover ground. Look around. Check the next patch, then the next one. That works on land, where prey is packed into a thin skin on a surface and you can see across it. Down here, it is arithmetic that kills you. Search a volume that big, at 1 kilometer an hour, and you would spend more energy looking than you could ever recover from finding. A shark cannot swim its way to a meal in the deep. Nobody can. The ocean is too large and too empty, so the strategy inverts. You do not go and find the food. You let the ocean tell you where the food is, and the ocean does tell you, constantly, in a language that has nothing to do with light. Everything that dies leaks. Everything that bleeds, rots, breathes, or moves releases chemistry into the water, and the water does not hold still. Currents pick those molecules up and drag them out, kilometer after kilometer, into a thin, invisible streamer that says something is dead over there. And here's the direction. In the dark, chemistry is the only long-range broadcast there is. It is the deep sea's version of a signal fire, which is why this shark's head is shaped the way it is. That blunt, heavy snout is not stupidity. It is instrumentation. Work on Greenland shark brains has found olfactory bulbs, the parts of the brain that process smell, that are enormous relative to the rest of the brain, among the largest proportions measured in sharks. The rest of the brain is not large. This is not a clever animal in the way we like animals to be clever. It is a specialist. Most of its head is dedicated to one job, and that job is chemistry. So the eyes never mattered. The sensor was always the nose. And once you see that, the parasite problem from a moment ago stops being tragic and becomes almost irrelevant, which is exactly what it is. Now here is where the popular image of shark smelling falls apart. You have heard the line about a drop of blood in an Olympic pool. Forget it. That version imagines a smooth gradient getting stronger as you approach, weaker as you drift away, like a warm and cold game with an obvious answer at the end. Real plumes do not behave like that at all. Turbulence shreds them. What actually leaves a carcass is not a cone, but a torn ribbon of odor, patchy, twisted, full of gaps, threads of scent separated by water that smells of absolutely nothing. Swim through it, and the signal appears, vanishes, appears again somewhere it should not be. There is no reliable stronger and weaker. Following concentration alone would send you wandering. Experiments on other shark species point to something more precise and considerably stranger. They appear to steer using the difference in when odor hits one nostril versus the other, tiny gaps, measured in fractions of a second, and to turn toward whichever side got the news first. Not how strong, how early. The animal is not smelling a smell. It is timing an arrival, and using the timing to fix a direction. Nobody has demonstrated that specifically in a Greenland shark. Take it as an inference from relatives rather than a fact about this species. What is not in doubt is that this animal is built around its nose to a degree that borders on obsessive. And now watch what slowness does in this situation. A fast predator tracking a plume has a real problem. It blows through the thread, loses it, has to circle, has to reacquire, and every correction costs fuel it must replace. Speed makes you overshoot the signal. A Greenland shark drifting through the same plume at walking pace stays inside the information for longer, has more time to compare one nostril against the other, and pays almost nothing for the trip. It cannot lose the trail by rushing, because it does not rush. The tail beat that looked pathetic in the first minute of this story turns out to be tuned to the way information actually moves down here. There is a catch, and it is a strange one. The message is old. Odor takes time to travel. A plume reaching this shark from 2 kilometers away has been drifting for hours. It is not telling the animal what is happening. It is telling the animal what happened. The carcass on that seafloor might already be stripped. The dying thing might already be dead and buried under a moving carpet of scavengers. Every meal in the deep is a race whose start you missed, and you are running it in slow motion, which sounds hopeless until you remember what cold did to the clock. Arrive late and you still eat because in water this cold, a carcass does not rot on a mammalian timetable. Warm water destroys a dead body in days. Near freezing water preserves it. The Arctic deep is a refrigerator, and this shark is the animal that shows up after everyone else has eaten and still finds something worth having. Drop bait into deep water anywhere on Earth and things come. That is one of the most consistent observations in deep sea work. Put a piece of meat on the bottom, leave a camera running, and out of a place that looked utterly empty an hour ago, animals arrive out of the dark, one after another, from directions nobody could have predicted. They were not nearby. They were downstream. In cold northern water, one of the shapes that arrives is gray, blunt-nosed, and far too large for the situation. So the scavenging half of this animal is solved. Nose, current, patience, cold. That machine works. The other half does not fit at all. A sleeping seal is not a carcass. It is not leaking a plume of decay across 2 kilometers of ocean. It is intact, alive, and quiet, and it announces almost nothing. Smell can put a shark in the neighborhood, maybe drawn by whatever a group of seals leaves in the water. It cannot put a mouth on a specific animal in total darkness. Something has to handle the last stretch, and the shark has no working eyes to do it with. Sharks carry 2 other systems for exactly this. One is the lateral line, a run of sensors along the flank that reads water movement, pressure, the push and shove of nearby bodies. It works over short distances, and it does not care about light at all. The second is the reason sharks are unsettling, in a way most animals are not. Scattered across that snout are hundreds of tiny pores, each one filled with jelly, each one running back to a bundle of cells that detects electricity, the ampullae of Lorenzini. Their range is short, centimeters to maybe a meter, useless for searching. They are not a searching tool, they are a closing tool. And here is why that matters. Every living animal leaks electricity, muscle contraction, nerve activity, the gill movements of a fish, the heartbeat of a mammal, all of it generates weak electrical fields in seawater. You cannot switch it off. You cannot hold still enough to hide it. A sleeping seal, motionless, silent, invisible in black water, doing everything right, is still broadcasting the one signal it has no ability to stop. Whether Greenland sharks use their ampullae to close on seals in the dark has never been filmed and remains inference. What is known is that the hardware is there, the light is not, and the eyes are compromised anyway, which finishes rebuilding the hunt from the ground up. There is no chase in this story. There never was. There is a chemical map, a slow animal moving through it at almost no cost, and a final meter closed by senses that do not need light and cannot be fooled by stillness. Detection, then arrival. And that is where the next problem starts, because when this shark finally reaches the meal, it is often standing in front of something enormous. A seal, a whale carcass, a body far too big to swallow and far too tough to tear with a normal mouth. So look at the mouth. Nothing about it is built the way you would expect. Roll the animal over and look underneath. The mouth is not where your instinct says it should be. It sits back under that heavy snout, a short horizontal slit, almost prim, closed most of the time. If somebody showed you a photograph of just that face, cropped, no context, you would not guess predator. You would guess something that eats mud. Then it opens, and the design underneath is one of the more disturbing things in the ocean, because it is not one set of teeth, it is two, and they are doing completely different jobs. Along the top jaw, roughly 50 small teeth, narrow, pointed, needle-shaped. No blades, no serrations, no cutting edge worth the name. Held straight like pins. Look at that alone and you would say this animal eats soft, small things and swallows them whole. Along the bottom jaw, something else entirely. The lower teeth are squat and broad, each one carrying a low cusp angled hard to the side, and they are packed edge to edge so tightly that the individual teeth stop reading as teeth. They fuse visually into one continuous line, a single blade running the width of the jaw, with a fine repeating edge. That is not a mouth. That is a saw fitted under a row of nails. And this is where most people's expectations break because we have one very loud template for what shark teeth are. White triangles, serrated edges, the great white's whole strategy in a photograph. Hit hard, cut through, retreat, let the wound do the work. Top and bottom roughly matched, both sides doing the same thing. The Greenland shark is not running that program. Nothing about its equipment matches. And the reason is the problem it has to solve, which is a problem no fast shark ever faces. Its food is bigger than its mouth. Think it through: a seal, a large fish, a dead whale on the seafloor, which in a cold ocean can sit there as a mountain of meat for a very long time. None of that fits down a throat. Every predator that eats things larger than itself needs a way to reduce the meal into pieces. And there are only a few ways to do that. You can bite through if you have jaws that generate enough force and blades that finish the cut. You can shake like a crocodile, whipping your head or spinning your whole body to tear a limb off through sheer violence. You can rip by getting a grip and swimming away with everything you have. Every one of those needs speed, force, acceleration, explosive muscle. The Greenland shark has none of it. Cold muscle does not do explosive. This animal cannot thrash, cannot lunge, cannot rip anything free by kicking hard because kicking hard is not in the catalog. It brought a slow body to a job that appears to require a fast one. So it solved it a different way. And once you see the solution, you cannot unsee it. The upper needles are not for cutting. They are for holding. They punch in and stay in, a row of pins fixing the flesh in place, turning the prey into something anchored to the shark's head. That is their entire function. They do not need to be sharp in the slashing sense. They need to grip. Then the shark rolls. The body turns slowly, deliberately, and as it turns, that lower blade sweeps through the flesh that the uppers have pinned. Not a bite. A cut driven by rotation. the way you would carve something by turning the knife instead of pushing it. What comes out is not a torn chunk. It is a plug, a near-circular crater, clean at the edges, taken out of the side of something much larger, with the shark still attached to it. The jaw never had to be strong. The body is the muscle. The mouth is only the tool head, and the engine is several hundred kilograms of shark rotating. And rotation is the one violent thing a slow animal can still do. Moving fast in a straight line costs fuel and fights the water the whole way. Turning against an anchor does not. A long, heavy body with a grip on something solid can twist and put serious force through a very small patch of flesh, and it can do it gradually, without a single burst of acceleration. The shark is not fighting the water, it is fighting the seal, using the seal as leverage. The physics that took the chase away from this animal never took the kill. Careful here. Nobody has watched this happen to a living seal in the dark and filmed it start to finish. The mechanism is read from the shape of the teeth, from the way the jaws fit, from the wounds left on carcasses and on animals that survived, and from close relatives. It is inference built on solid anatomy, not eyewitness. Hold it as the best current explanation rather than a settled fact. The best current explanation happens to be supported by a smaller animal doing the identical trick right now in warmer water. The cookie-cutter shark is about the length of your forearm. It lives in the open ocean, and it feeds on tuna, dolphins, whales, seals, anything enormous it can reach by latching on, rotating its body, and cutting out a neat circular plug of flesh before releasing. Its victims are hundreds of times its size. They survive. They just wear the scar, a perfect round crater, for the rest of their lives. Picture that result on a body roughly the size of a person. A hole about the width of a fist, edges cleanly beveled, skin and blubber gone straight down to muscle, taken out of one flank in a single motion with nothing torn around the rim. Marks like that are recognizable precisely because nothing else in the sea makes them. A bite from a hunting shark looks like violence. This looks like machining, same physics, different scale. A shark does not need to be bigger than its food, and it does not need to be faster if it can hold on and turn. Now stack that on top of everything else this animal has. It cannot be outgrown. Size is the standard defense in the ocean. The whole point of getting big is that fewer things can put their mouth around you, and this shark has quietly removed that protection from the board. A whale is not too large for it. A whale is simply more plugs. It cannot be outrun by anything already caught, because the grip is pins, not pressure. Pulling away tears you open, and it does not care whether the food is alive. That last one is the reversal, and it is bigger than it looks. The same mouth that takes a plug out of a sleeping seal takes a plug out of a 2-week-old carcass on the seafloor. There is no separate hunting mouth and scavenging mouth. There is one system, and the condition of the meal is irrelevant to it. There is a second mode too, and it is easy to miss because it is the opposite of everything just described. Sleeper sharks appear to be capable of serious suction. Open a mouth like that fast enough inside a throat built to expand, and you generate a pressure drop that pulls water in, and whatever is floating in that water comes with it. The evidence sits in the stomachs, where prey has been found whole, not sawn, not plugged, intact, swallowed entire, which is not something a rolling saw produces. So the picture doubles, small enough and it gets inhaled before it knows the shark is there, large enough and it gets pinned, rolled, and cored. 2 solutions in one head, and neither of them requires the animal to move quickly. That is what makes this mouth genuinely unusual. Almost every predator on Earth is constrained by prey size. Too big to handle, too small to bother. This one has erased the ceiling with the roll and the floor with the suction. And the space in between is everything, which drags the story straight back to the argument from the beginning, the one that will not go away. predator or scavenger, hunter or cleaner. The teeth just told you that the question is badly formed. The animal is not choosing a lifestyle. It is running one mechanism against whatever the current delivers. So stop theorizing and open the stomachs. They have been opened in large numbers for a long time because this shark was fished commercially for centuries and the contents were there to be counted. That record is one of the strangest lists in marine biology, and it is not strange because of the seals. It is strange because of what else is in there. Things that live nowhere near the ocean, things that should never, under any circumstances, end up inside a fish in the Arctic deep. And a few of them make you wonder what this animal is actually doing up there in the dark. Start with the boring part of the list, because the boring part is already broken. Fish, lots of fish. Greenland halibut, redfish, cod, capelin, herring, wolffish, lumpfish, skates, squid, octopus, crabs and urchins and things scraped off the bottom. Jellyfish, which is a whole separate confession about how little this animal cares. Picture the scene that produced that list because it was not a laboratory. A wooden deck somewhere in Greenland or Iceland or Svalbard, cold, a shark the size of a small car opened up with knives, and men going through the stomach by hand to see what fell out. That happened tens of thousands of times over a few centuries. Whatever else you think about it, it left us an enormous, brutal, accidental record of what this animal eats, collected by people who had no scientific interest in the answer at all. Read the list again and find the problem, because it is sitting in plain sight. Cod are fast. Halibut are fast when they need to be. Every one of those fish can leave a Greenland shark in the dust without effort, and they are turning up inside it, sometimes intact, sometimes recognizable enough that nobody can pretend they arrived as rotten scraps drifting past. The seal argument from the beginning of this story never went away. It just got quieter and repeated itself a few hundred times with smaller animals. So how does the slowest large fish in the ocean fill its stomach with faster fish? 3 answers are on the table, and no one has closed the case between them. The first is stealth, the same logic as the sleeping seal. Fish rest. Fish sit on the bottom. In near-freezing water, a fish is also cold, also slow, also running its own chemistry at a fraction of the pace it would manage in a warm sea. The shark's slowness looks less absurd when you remember that everything around it is chilled to the same speed limit. It is not a slow animal in a fast world. It is a slow animal in a slow world, carrying a mouth that can inhale. The second is timing. Injured, dying, spawning, distracted, tangled. There is always a supply of animals having the worst day of their lives, and a patient nose finds them. The third is us. Greenland sharks show up at fishing gear. They take fish off lines and out of nets. They end up hauled onto decks in fisheries that were never looking for them. And they have been doing this for as long as people have been dropping gear into that water. A long line is, from the shark's point of view, a row of animals that cannot swim away. It is scavenging with a modern supplier. Remember that, because it comes back later and it comes back badly. There is a subtler line of evidence, too. The chemical signature of an animal's tissue carries a record of what it has been eating, built up slowly over long periods, and analyses of that kind on Greenland sharks point toward a diet containing real amounts of marine mammal, particularly in the largest individuals. That is not proof of hunting. It cannot tell you whether the seal was asleep or already dead. What it does say is that seals are not an occasional accident in this animal's life. They are part of the job. Now leave the fish and let the list escalate, because it does not stop where you expect. Seals. Ringed seals, harp seals, hooded seals, bearded seals, in numbers that stopped being coincidence a long time ago. At this point in the story, that should feel almost mundane. You already know how it works. Then whale, narwhal, beluga, larger whales, arriving as chunks and pieces, which fits everything the last chapter showed you about the mouth. This shark does not need to kill a whale. Nothing on Earth needs to kill a whale for a Greenland shark to eat one. Whales die constantly, of age, of ice, of orcas, of injury, and they sink, and in cold water, they stay edible. Then other sharks, smaller ones, including, in reports, its own species. Sit with that for a moment. An animal that takes centuries to grow, in a place with almost nothing to eat, has been found with pieces of its own kind inside it. Not because it is vicious, because in an ocean this empty food is food, and the shark has no category for anything else. And then the list stops making sense. Reindeer, horse. In one old report, remains of a polar bear. Land animals, inside a fish. Hundreds of meters down in the Arctic dark. The reports are old and mostly anecdotal, collected in an era when people were cutting these sharks open by the thousand for their oil and writing down what they found without much rigor. Treat them carefully. A record from a century ago describing a reindeer in a shark is not a study. And some of these accounts have been repeated so many times they have hardened into facts they were never entitled to be. That caveat matters. The caveat does not make them go away either, and the explanation is not the one your imagination wants. Nobody thinks this shark climbed out of the water. Think instead about what the Arctic actually does with its animals. Reindeer cross rivers and fjords, and some of them drown. Herds fall through ice. Storms and floods sweep bodies out. Cliffs, avalanches, hunters, disease, and rot on a coastline where every dead thing ends up in cold water sooner or later. Add centuries of humans, whaling stations, ships, settlements, all dumping carcasses and waste straight over the side into the same sea. The Arctic is not a place where land ends and ocean begins. It is a place with a chute, and underneath that chute is an animal that can smell a plume from kilometers away, costs almost nothing to keep running, has a mouth that can take a plug out of anything, and never gets full enough to be picky. A dead horse falls in. Weeks later, a shark shows up and eats a piece of it. That is not fantasy. That is the whole system doing exactly what it does. So here is the reversal. And it kills a question that has been running since the first minute. Predator or scavenger? Hunter or cleaner? Which is it? Neither. Both. The question is ours, not the animals. We invented that split because we grew up in ecosystems where it means something. On land, in warm water, hunting and scavenging really are different careers, requiring different bodies, different senses, different risks. A lion is not a vulture. The distinction is real up here in the light. Take it into the Arctic deep, and it dissolves. Down there, food is not a category of behavior. It is an event. Something becomes available by dying, by sleeping, by getting hooked, by falling out of the sky. The shark's entire biology is built to be present when that happens and to be unconcerned about which version it was. The nose does not report whether the meat is alive. The mouth does not work differently on a corpse. The metabolism does not care that 11 weeks went by between meals. This animal is not a predator that scavenges or a scavenger that hunts. It is an opportunity engine. And that is not a lesser design. It is the only design that pays in a place like this. Specialists need reliable prey. Reliable prey is exactly what the deep Arctic does not have. Every animal down there that insisted on one food source, one method, one strategy, met a season where the strategy failed. And the sea is not merciful about that. The generalist that can eat halibut, jellyfish, whale, seal, another shark, and a drowned reindeer in whatever order the ocean serves them, never has a bad year. It just has a slow one, and slow does not hurt it at all. Which brings the story to the thing that should have been obvious a long time ago. Look at that list again. Everything in the Arctic ends up inside this shark. Fish, mammals, birds, carrion, its own relatives. It sits at the end of nearly every food chain in the region. Now try to name what eats it. Almost nothing does. Orcas may take one occasionally. Larger sharks may take small ones. Beyond that, an animal that cannot swim away, cannot fight, cannot hide, and is often blind, moving slowly through open water for centuries, is somehow not on anybody's menu. That should not be possible. Slow, soft, defenseless animals get eaten. That is the rule. Something is protecting it. Not armor, not speed, not size, because size never stopped anything. It is chemistry. This shark's flesh is loaded with compounds that will drop a sled dog, put a grown man on the floor, and drive people who have eaten it into something that looks like drunkenness with the fun removed. Its own meat is hostile. The obvious reading is that it evolved a poison to defend itself. That reading is wrong, and the real reason is stranger than a defense. The poison is not there to protect the shark from the ocean. It is there to protect the shark from the ocean's physics. Eat this animal fresh, and you will find out about it within hours. It starts as something like drunkenness. Not the pleasant part, the end part. Balance goes first, then coordination, then speech. People who have taken a serious dose describe staggering, vomiting, a head full of nothing, a body that will not answer. In bad cases, it goes further, into convulsions, into collapse, occasionally into death. Sled dogs fed the raw meat have been reported going down the same way. Unable to stand. Legs no longer connected to intentions. Nobody had to discover this in a laboratory. Everyone who has ever lived beside these sharks knew it, and knew it the hard way, and the knowledge got baked into the culture around them. This fish will hurt you. So the story writes itself. A slow, blind, defenseless animal in an ocean full of teeth evolves a chemical weapon. Poison instead of speed. Nature's oldest trade, the one the pufferfish made, the one the frog made, the one the cane toad made. It is a tidy explanation. It is also backwards. Poison as a defense has a shape. It gets concentrated where it will do the most good, in the skin, in a gland, in a spine, at a point of contact. It is loaded, targeted, and delivered. That is what a weapon looks like. This shark's toxicity has none of that shape. It is not in a gland. It is not in a spine. It is not concentrated anywhere at all, because it is everywhere. Muscle, blood, tissue, the whole animal, top to bottom, saturated with the same chemistry. That is not a weapon. Weapons do not fill the entire body of the thing carrying them. That is infrastructure. And to understand what it is holding up, you have to start with a problem so basic that almost nobody thinks about it. Seawater is trying to dry you out. Salt water pulls fresh water toward it. Any animal living in the sea with dilute body fluids is leaking, constantly, water flowing out through gills and skin toward the saltier ocean, and it has to fight that leak every second of its life. Bony fish handle it by drinking seawater and burning energy to pump the salt back out. It works. It is also a running cost that never stops. Sharks solved it a completely different way, hundreds of millions of years ago, and their solution was to stop fighting. Instead of keeping their fluids dilute, they load them with a waste product, urea. The stuff your kidneys spend all day getting rid of, sharks keep, deliberately, at concentrations that would poison you. They stack it up in the blood and tissue until their internal chemistry is about as concentrated as the sea outside. Match the ocean, and the ocean stops pulling. The leak closes. No pumping, no drinking, no running cost. Brilliant. And it creates a catastrophe. Urea at those concentrations attacks proteins. Proteins only work because they are folded into precise shapes, and urea unfolds them. It is used in laboratories for exactly that purpose, as a chemical that takes proteins apart. A shark that filled its body with urea and did nothing else would be an animal slowly dissolving its own enzymes from the inside. So there is a second molecule, and it is the one that matters here: trimethylamine N-oxide, TMAO. It does the opposite of urea. It stabilizes protein folding, pushes those shapes back together, holds the structure. Sharks carry both, roughly 2 parts urea to 1 part TMAO, and the two chemicals cancel each other out. One would destroy the animal. The other would be pointless alone. Together, they let a shark live in salt water without spending a single calorie fighting it. Every shark on Earth runs this system. So far, nothing unusual. Here is where the Greenland shark separates from the pack, and it is about the place it lives. Pressure does the same thing to proteins that urea does. It squeezes them, distorts the folds, disrupts the machinery. Go down a few hundred meters, then 1,000, then 2,000, and the water column stacked above you starts interfering with your own biochemistry at the molecular level. This is one of the least appreciated facts about the deep sea. The danger is not that pressure crushes you like a can. The danger is that pressure quietly stops your proteins from working. TMAO fights that too. It is a chemical brace against deformation, whatever the source, urea, or pressure, or cold. And when you measure marine animals across depth, a pattern falls out that is hard to look away from. The deeper the species lives, the more TMAO it carries. Shallow fish, a little. Deeper fish, more. Really deep fish, loaded with it. The molecule is not decorative. It is the entry fee for depth. Push that trend far enough and you reach a genuinely strange idea. There is a hypothesis that if a fish descended deep enough, it would need so much TMAO to keep its proteins working that its body chemistry would become as concentrated as seawater itself. And at that point, the whole osmotic arrangement collapses. Water would start moving the wrong way. The trick would stop working. That ceiling falls somewhere in the region of 8 kilometers down. We have not found fish below roughly that depth. It remains a hypothesis, not a settled law. It is also the kind of hypothesis that reframes an entire ocean. The deepest trenches on Earth may be empty of fish, not because it is too dark or too cold or too hungry down there, but because of a molecule, which puts the Greenland shark's chemistry in a completely different light. It is not carrying poison. It is carrying a passport. That chemical load is what lets it operate through a vertical range most animals cannot touch, from under the ice to well over a kilometer down, in permanent cold, with its proteins still folding correctly. So why does it drop a grown man? Because of what happens when the system stops running. TMAO is stable while the animal is alive and maintaining it. Kill the shark and bacteria and enzymes in the flesh go to work, and they convert TMAO into trimethylamine, which is a very different molecule, small and neuroactive and unwelcome anywhere near a nervous system. The urea breaks down too, into ammonia. What was infrastructure decomposes into a cocktail. Look at what that actually means. The shark is not poisonous because it built a poison. The shark is poisonous because it dies. And the chemistry that held it together for centuries falls apart into the chemistry that takes you apart. The meat is not dangerous in spite of being alive for so long. It is dangerous because of exactly what kept it alive. And the human response to that is one of the best things in this entire story. In Iceland, they eat it anyway. The method is not cooking, because heat does not fix this. The method is waiting. The shark is cut up and buried, pressed, left in gravel or containers for weeks, while fluid drains out of it and fermentation grinds the amines down. Then, it is hung in an open shed for months, in cold air, until what is left has gassed off enough of the ammonia to be survivable. The result is haakarl, and the smell of it is famous for a reason. That smell is the poison leaving. Think about what that process is. An animal whose entire biology is built on time, and the only way to make it edible was to spend more time. We could not out-chemistry it. We had to outweight it. Now the question the toxin raises, and the honest answer. Does the chemistry work as a defense anyway? It might. Evolution repurposes things constantly, and if an orca learns that biting one of these sharks means a mouthful of ammonia, that lesson sticks. But nobody has demonstrated it, and it is not why the chemistry exists. It is a side effect that may have been quietly useful for a very long time. It did not work on us. We found a workaround, and once we did, the last thing standing between this animal and a hook was nothing at all. Hold on to that. For now, one thing is still unexplained. The chemistry keeps the proteins folded. It does not hold the shark up. This animal has no swim bladder. Nothing inside it is full of gas. By rights, it should be sinking every second it stops swimming. And it is not swimming, that is the whole point of it. So what is holding several hundred kilograms of shark still in the middle of the water column, at zero cost for decades? The answer is an organ so large it changes the shape of the animal. And it is the reason we nearly killed them all. Here is a problem sharks have never fully solved. They sink. Muscle is denser than seawater. Cartilage is denser than seawater. Skin, blood, guts, teeth, all of it heavier than the water it displaces. A shark that stops moving does not hang in place like a fish in an aquarium. It goes down. Every shark on Earth is falling slowly all the time and has to do something about it. Bony fish fixed this ages ago with a bag of gas. The swim bladder is one of the great pieces of vertebrate engineering. A tunable balloon that lets a fish sit at any depth doing nothing, adjusting the volume until it matches the water and simply stopping there. It is so effective that most fish in the ocean have one. Sharks never got it. Different branch, different history, no bladder, no gas, no balloon. And before you file that as bad luck, look at what a swim bladder would actually do in this animal's life. Gas compresses. Take a fish with a bladder from 200 meters down to 1,000, and the bag collapses under pressure, and the fish starts sinking. And to fix that, it has to pump gas back in against that pressure, which is slow and expensive. Go up fast, and the reverse happens. The gas expands, and it can kill. A swim bladder is a beautiful solution for staying at one depth. It is a liability for an animal that lives up and down a kilometer of water column, which is exactly what this one does. So sharks are working with two other options, and they are completely different philosophies. Option 1 is to fly. Keep moving forward, angle the pectoral fins like wings, and generate lift the way an aircraft does. This works. It is what a mako does, what a great white does. It also means you can never stop. Stop and you sink, so you swim forever for your entire life, paying an energy bill every second just to remain at a depth. Those sharks are not restless. They are held up by their own effort. The Greenland shark cannot do this. Lift needs speed, and there is no speed here. At 1 kilometer an hour, wings do nothing. Look at the animal, and you can see it has not even tried. Its fins are small, almost dismissively small on a body that size. No great outstretched wings, no aerofoil, no gear for staying up by moving, which leaves option 2. Do not fly, float. Cut one of these sharks open, and the thing that comes out is barely believable. The liver fills the body cavity, not a lobe tucked in beside other organs, the way yours is. A pale, oily mass so large it accounts for a serious fraction of the animal's total weight. In deep-sea sharks, commonly around a fifth of the whole body and sometimes more, spilling out of the abdomen when the wall is opened. If you had never seen a shark before, you would think you had found a tumor or a fuel tank. It is a fuel tank. It is also a flotation device, and that is the part that matters here. The liver is packed with oil, and shark liver oil is not ordinary fat. Deep-sea sharks in particular load theirs with squalene, a light hydrocarbon that is noticeably less dense than water and less dense than the fats most animals store. Fill a large enough container with something lighter than seawater and put it inside a body that is heavier than seawater, and the two cancel. That is the whole trick. The shark carries its own lift, permanently, chemically, and it does not have to move a muscle to use it. The result is an animal sitting at almost neutral buoyancy, not rising, not falling. Just there, at whatever depth it happens to be, indefinitely, for free. Hanging in black water costs it nothing. Drifting 100 meters up costs it almost nothing. And the vertical range that would wreck a fish with a gas bladder is open to it, because oil does not compress the way gas does. It goes from under the ice to well over a kilometer down and back, and the physics never sends it a bill. Now put the whole machine together, because this is the chapter where the economics close. A body running at the temperature of the water, burning almost nothing. A mouth that works on anything the ocean provides, alive or dead. A nose that lets the currents do the searching. A liver that removes the cost of staying in place. Add it up and you get something genuinely unusual on this planet. A large predator whose cost of existing is close to zero. That is not a compromise. That is not an animal getting by. That is the most efficient large body in the Northern Ocean. And everything that looks like weakness in it, the slowness, the blindness, the indifference, is a component of the same design. And that design is exactly what nearly finished it, because that liver is worth money. For centuries before electricity, before petroleum, the world ran on oil that had to be cut out of animals. Lamp oil, machine oil, lubricants, leather treatment, industrial processes. Whales paid for most of it. In the north, so did this shark, and it paid for a specific reason. It was the easiest large animal in the Arctic to catch. Think about why. You do not need a chase. You do not need harpoons and boats and a fight. You drop a baited line into cold water and wait for an animal with an enormous nose, no speed, no fight in it, and no ability to refuse. It comes to the smell. It takes the bait. It is hauled up slowly, because it does not do anything any other way. It did not even need a boat. In Greenland, sharks were taken through holes cut in the ice, on hand lines, hauled up one at a time, in the dark, in winter. That is the entire hunt. A hole, a line, a smell, and patience. The shark's own strategy turned around and used against it. Then you cut it open, take the liver, and put the rest back in the sea. That is the image that should stay with you. The shark was not eaten. Its flesh is poison, and everyone knew it. Boats worked for generations pulling up these animals, removing one organ and dumping the body. Tens of thousands a year at the height of it, in some seasons, in some regions. Centuries of animals reduced to a barrel of oil and a carcass going back over the side. And the fishery did not end because anybody realized what was happening. It ended because petroleum got cheap. Mineral oil undercut it. Electric light replaced lamps, and one day the market simply stopped wanting what these sharks were made of. The killing tapered off for economic reasons, not moral ones. Nobody stopped. It just stopped being worth the trouble. And the liver never entirely lost its value. Squalene still gets pulled out of deep-sea sharks for cosmetics and other industrial uses, which is why fisheries for slow, deep, long-lived sharks keep reappearing somewhere in the world every time a market wants something light and oily. The chemistry that holds these animals up remains the most sellable thing about them. What is genuinely hard to sit with is this. At the time, nobody had any idea what they were taking. A Greenland shark on a deck in 1900 was a fish. A big, ugly, slow, stinking fish with a valuable liver. There was no reason to think of it as anything else, because there was no way to know. Ask how old that animal was, and the honest answer then was that nobody could tell you. Not roughly, not within a century. There was no method. You cannot age a shark the way you age a cod, and it took a very long time and a very strange idea to find a way in. The reason is in the skeleton. Sharks are cartilage. No bones, no growth rings in the ear stones the way bony fish have, and in most sharks, the one place you can look for banding, the vertebrae, gives you something to count. Greenland sharks do not even give you that. Their vertebrae are poorly mineralized, soft, unhelpful, with no reliable record laid down in them at all. So there is the animal. No bones, no rings, no annual marks. A body that grows so slowly that size tells you almost nothing. A creature that could be 20 years old or 400, and no instrument on Earth to tell the difference. For most of the time, we have been pulling these sharks out of the water, we were guessing. And the way that finally got solved is the strangest piece of detective work in this entire story, because it did not come from biology at all. It came from nuclear weapons. To work out how old something is, you need one thing above everything else. You need a part of it that keeps a record and never gets rewritten. That is why trees are easy. A tree adds a ring and then leaves it alone forever. And the whole history of the organism is sitting there in a stack, waiting for someone to cut across it. Fish are easy for the same reason. Inside the skull of a cod are otoliths, small stones of calcium carbonate that grow in layers all through its life. And because the fish has no way to dissolve them and start over, they hold a readable timeline. Shells do it. Teeth do it, in layers of cementum. Even coral does it. Every one of those works on the same principle. Somewhere in the body is a structure that gets built and then abandoned. That is rarer than you think because bodies are not archives. Bodies are construction sites. You are being taken apart and reassembled right now. Your blood, your skin, your gut lining, your bone, all of it is being torn down and rebuilt continuously. And by design, nothing keeps a timestamp, because keeping a timestamp is not useful to survival. Living things overwrite themselves. That is what living is. Now bring in the Greenland shark, which has no archive at all, no bones. Sharks are cartilage from the beginning, and cartilage does not hold a record, no otoliths worth counting. In many sharks, you can at least section a vertebra and find bands of calcification, and with enough care and enough argument, you can try to count them. That method is difficult and contested even where it works. It does not work here. The Greenland shark's vertebrae are poorly mineralized, soft, vague. There is nothing to count because the animal never laid anything down. Even the fallback failed. Size will not save you either. Growth this slow decouples size from age almost completely, and two sharks the same length could have decades or centuries between them, and you cannot solve it by waiting. That is the joke. Tag a shark, release it, come back later, measure it again, and you have a growth rate. Except the growth is so slow that the signal barely clears the error on the measuring tape, and any study designed to follow one of these animals through its life would outlast the scientist, the funding, the institution, and quite possibly the country. So the position for the entire history of our relationship with this animal was total ignorance. We had killed them in enormous numbers. We had cut them open, counted their stomach contents, cataloged their parasites, mapped their range. And if you had asked how long one lived, the only honest answer was a shrug. An animal with no clock anywhere in its body. Except that is not quite true. And the exception is the best twist in this story. There is exactly one place in a vertebrate that gets built and then permanently abandoned. One tissue where the construction stops and nothing ever goes back in to renovate. It is the center of the eye. Think about what a lens has to do. It has to be transparent, not mostly transparent, optically clear, or it is worthless. And transparency, in living tissue, is close to impossible because everything that makes a cell work also makes it cloudy. Blood vessels scatter light. Organelles scatter light. The machinery of repair and replacement scatters light, so the lens does something drastic. The cells at its core fill themselves with proteins called crystallins, then throw out their own internals. No nucleus, no organelles, no metabolism. They stop being cells in any active sense and become packed clear protein, and they stay that way for the rest of the animal's life. The lens then grows outward, layer on layer, like an onion, adding new material around a center that was finished long ago and is never touched again. The proteins in the middle of your eye lens were made before you were born. They are the oldest things in your body. They have never been replaced, and if you live 100 years, they will be 100 years old, sitting in the middle of your vision, unchanged since you were a fetus. That is an archive. Accidentally, unavoidably, an archive. Now hold that against everything you already know about this shark, because the irony is almost too neat. The one organ that carries its birth certificate is the eye. The eye it does not use. The eye it stopped protecting. The eye that has a parasite chewing on the front of it, on most individuals, for their entire lives, because vision was not worth defending in the dark. The animal abandoned its eyes, and in doing so, it kept the only record it has. The parasite eats the cornea, the outer surface. It does not reach the core. That center stays sealed, chemically frozen at the moment of the animal's birth, while the shark spends the next few centuries not caring about it at all. There is a cost buried in that, and it should be said out loud. The lens is a small, hard, clouded bead, and to get at the middle of it you have to open the eye, which means the shark has to be dead. There is no version of this method that works on a living animal. Every age we have for this species came out of a body on a deck, most of them hauled up as bycatch by boats that were fishing for something else entirely. We learned how long they live by killing them. So we have a sample of a Greenland shark from the day it was born. Now we need to read it. And this is where the story leaves biology entirely and arrives somewhere ugly. Carbon in the atmosphere includes a small fraction of carbon-14, an unstable version made high in the air by cosmic rays. It has been trickling into everything alive for as long as there has been life, at a fairly steady background level. Steady, that is, until the middle of the 20th century. Between the 1950s and the early 1960s, nations detonated nuclear weapons in the open atmosphere over and over. Those explosions flooded the air with carbon-14, roughly doubling the amount up there in a matter of years. Then, in 1963, atmospheric testing was largely banned, and the spike stopped rising and began to fall, as the excess carbon slowly worked its way into the oceans and the biosphere. That curve, up hard and then down slowly, is called the bomb pulse. Every plant that grew during it took that carbon in. Every animal that ate those plants took it in. Every tissue built anywhere in the world during those years carries the signature. We stamped a timestamp on the entire biosphere by accident, while trying to build better weapons. It has been used to date human remains, to catch art forgeries, to establish when tissue in a body was formed. And it works on the middle of an eye because the middle of an eye is tissue that was formed once and never renewed. So here is the method, and it is elegant enough to be worth spelling out. Take Greenland sharks of many different sizes, from small ones up to the giants. Dissect out the lens. Take the very center of it, the nucleus, the part made at birth. Measure the carbon-14 in it. If the core carries the bomb signature, that animal was born after the test started. That is not an estimate. That is a hard boundary. An animal with a birthday stamped into its eye by human weapons. And that gives you something you never had. A set of sharks with known approximate ages and known sizes. Anchor points. Real data on a growth curve, where before there was nothing but guessing. Then you look at the big ones. The large sharks, the 4-meter, 5-meter animals, have no bomb signal in their lenses at all. Their carbon is old, pre-bomb, which tells you immediately and unambiguously that they were born before the 1950s. That is all it tells you directly, before the bombs. It could mean 1940. It could mean 1700. To go further, you have to model. You take the growth curve built from the young sharks, you extrapolate it backward across the size range, and you calculate what age a 5-meter animal must be if it grew at that rate. And the moment you extrapolate, the certainty drops out of the exercise and assumptions walk in. There are more. Carbon-14 enters the sea more slowly than the air, and deep water lags the surface by a long way. The shark's carbon comes through its food, from prey at different depths with different histories. Every one of those effects has to be corrected for, and every correction is a judgment. Which is why what came out the other end is not a number. It is a range, a wide one. Wide enough that people repeat the headline figure without ever mentioning the error bars around it, and wide enough that the error bars are more interesting than the headline. Because even at the bottom of that range, because this animal is doing something no vertebrate is supposed to do. Here is what came out of the eye. For the largest sharks in the sample, the central estimate landed close to 400 years. Not 400 exactly, because nothing here is exact. 400 with an uncertainty of well over a century in either direction, giving a plausible floor somewhere near 270 and a ceiling past 500. That is the finding. And it should be said that the clue had been lying around for decades. Long before anyone thought about eye lenses, sharks had been tagged, measured, released, and occasionally caught again. And the growth those old records implied was so small it barely registered. Well under a centimeter a year. In some cases close to nothing. Do the arithmetic on that, and you already arrive at an unreasonable number. The arithmetic was available to anyone who wanted it. It was also a single thin thread of evidence pointing at a conclusion nobody had any reason to accept. And a lone measurement suggesting a fish lives for centuries is far more likely to be a bad measurement. The old caution was not stupidity. It was waiting for a second line of evidence, and the second line took most of a century to show up. When it finally did, within about a day of the result reaching the public, the second half of the sentence had been deleted. The 400-year shark. That is what everyone repeated, and it is not what the work said. The work set a range so wide you could fit the entire history of a country inside it. And that range is not a weakness in the story. It is the most honest thing in it, and the most interesting. So do what the headline never does. Attack the claim at its weakest point. Forget 400. Throw it away. Take the bottom of the range, the most conservative reading anyone could defend, the number you would use if you wanted to be as unimpressed as possible. Call it 270 years. Now go and find another animal with a backbone that can do that. The bowhead whale is the closest thing to a rival, and it is a serious one, with individuals estimated past 2 centuries and independent lines of evidence behind that, including old harpoon points found embedded in living animals. Impressive? Not enough. Some rockfish reach around 200. Tortoises, the animals everyone reaches for first, top out near 200 at the extreme. Humans, at the absolute documented limit, 122, and we consider that a marvel. At the floor of its range, at its least remarkable, in the version of the claim designed to disappoint you, the Greenland shark still wins. Not narrowly, it clears the entire vertebrate field by decades, using the number nobody bothers to quote. That is what makes the error bars worth caring about. The uncertainty does not soften the result. It cannot save you from it. Every version of the answer, from the most cautious to the most extravagant, describes an animal that outlives every other backboned creature on this planet. Push past the vertebrates, and you find the company it keeps, and the company is strange. Ocean quahogs, hard clams buried in cold seabeds live for centuries. One famous individual, aged by its shell rings, came in past 500. Certain corals live for thousands of years. Some sponges may be older still. Look at that list. Clams, corals, sponges. Not one of them has a brain worth the name. Not one of them moves. They are animals in the technical sense and furniture in every other sense, and their longevity comes from doing essentially nothing, very slowly, forever. The Greenland shark is in that bracket while being a large, mobile predator with a nervous system, senses, and a hunting strategy. It swims. It finds food. It eats seals. And it does all of that on a time scale that otherwise belongs to things bolted to the seafloor. Now the part that deserves respect rather than eye-rolling. Why is the range so wide? Because of what the last chapter left you with. The young sharks carry the bomb signal and give real anchor points. The big ones do not. Their carbon says one thing only: born before the 1950s. Everything passed that comes from a model, a growth curve fitted to the young animals and run backwards across the size range, and every extrapolation is a bet that the curve keeps behaving the way it did where you could actually see it. Add the ocean corrections. Carbon-14 takes time to move from air into water, and deep water lags the surface badly, and the shark's carbon arrives secondhand through its prey. Each correction is defensible. Each one is also a judgment, and judgments stack. So the honest output is a range. And anyone who hands you a single confident number for a 5-meter Greenland shark is telling you less than the truth, not more. There is something else about that sample worth knowing, and it cuts the other way. Those sharks were not chosen. They came from bycatch, from boats that caught them accidentally while fishing for other things. It was essentially a sample of whatever the ocean handed over, mostly females as it happened, and the largest animal in it was around 5 meters. Greenland sharks get bigger than that. Reports of 6-meter animals, and larger, have circulated for a long time. Those individuals were not in the sample because nobody happened to catch one and hand over the eyes. Run the growth curve out to that size, and the numbers get worse or better, depending on your temperament. Which means the 400 figure is not the ceiling for the species. It is the oldest animal that happened to end up on a deck in front of the right people. There are almost certainly older ones out there. Right now. Nobody has any idea where. And the reverse of that is worse. If the biggest sharks are the oldest, the biggest sharks are also the ones that have been swimming through the entire history of our fishing in that ocean. You do not restock a population like this. There is no farming it, no waiting a decade, no quiet rebuild after a bad run. Whatever is out there was manufactured by an ocean that existed before we arrived. And when a 5-meter shark comes over a rail dead, what has been removed from the sea is 3 or 4 centuries that took 3 or 4 centuries to make. Take the middle of the range and make it physical, because a number this size stops meaning anything without something to hold on to. A shark near the central estimate, alive today, was born before the electric light, before photography, before the internal combustion engine, before recorded sound, before anesthetic surgery, before anyone had worked out what a germ was. Its birth predates the Industrial Revolution. When the first steam engines were being bolted together in Europe, that animal was already swimming, already several decades into a life that had barely started. Then it just kept going. Through everything. Through the whaling era, through the world wars, through the invention of the aeroplane and the splitting of the atom, through the entire 20th century at 1 kilometer an hour, in the dark, at 1 degree, waiting for something to die nearby. And here is where I have to correct the framing, because the way we say this is wrong. We call it an old shark. It isn't old. Old implies it has been enduring, hanging on, running down. That is the human version, where 400 years means 400 years of wear, 400 years of a body degrading toward a finish line. This animal is not enduring. It is running at a different speed. Everything in it, the heart, the digestion, the growth, the repair, is turned down to a fraction of the rate you are used to, and has been since birth. It is not living a long life. It is living a normal life, in slow motion, in an environment where nothing hurries. That is the reframe. Not an old animal, a slow one, seen from a fast animal's point of view, which is genuinely lovely right up until you ask what it costs. Because a lifespan is not a prize. A lifespan is a schedule, and everything on that schedule stretches with it. If it takes centuries to reach full size, everything else in the life history moves too. And one item on that list matters more than all the others combined. Reproduction. Ask when this animal has its first pup, and the answer is worse than anything the lifespan implies. It is the number that should have been the headline. It is the number that should frighten you. And it is the number almost nobody mentions because 400 years sounds like a triumph, and the truth underneath it sounds like a trap. Around a century and a half. That is the current estimate for when a female Greenland shark has her first pup. Not her prime, her first. The number carries error bars of a couple of decades either way, and it comes out of the same growth curve that produced the lifespan, so it inherits every assumption that came with it. Treat it as an estimate. Then look at what even a badly wrong version of it means. A shark born when the liver fishery was at its worst, when boats were hauling these animals up through holes in the ice by the tens of thousands and dumping the bodies back, would still not be old enough to breed. Read that again slowly. The fishery that nearly emptied that ocean happened a century ago. Any shark born into it is biologically a child. It has been swimming for 100 years, and it has not yet started. Now go the other way. Find the mature adults out there today, the 4 and 5 meter animals, the ones doing the reproducing. Every single one of them was born before industrial fishing existed, before the boats, before the engines. The entire breeding population of this species right now in this ocean is made of animals manufactured by a world that no longer exists. This is where the story turns, and it turns hard. Everyone hears 400 years and files it as a superpower, invincible, untouchable, an animal that has beaten the problem everything else on Earth is losing. That is not what a long life is. A long life is a payment plan, and this one has the entire down payment at the front. Look at the arithmetic from the shark's side, because from the shark's side, it is completely reasonable. If you are going to live 400 years, spending the first 150 growing is not extravagant. It is proportionate. You still get 250 years of breeding afterwards. Even with a tiny output per attempt, even with long gaps, 2.5 centuries of reproduction adds up. The arrangement works. It works on one condition, and the condition is the whole problem. Nothing can change. A strategy like this is a bet that the ocean 200 years from now will be the same ocean it is today, that the water will be the same temperature, that the food will arrive the same way, that nothing new will show up with a hook in it. For most of this animal's history, that was the safest bet on the planet. The Arctic Deep is the most stable environment on Earth. Cold, dark, unchanging, indifferent, running the same way for millions of years. If you were designing a life history for a place that never moves, you would design this one. The bet was correct for as long as the bet had been made. Now the part that should make you uncomfortable, which is how little we actually know about the reproduction we are discussing. Nobody has seen it. Not the mating, not the birth, not the pups. Nothing. For an animal this large, this well-known, this frequently caught, sitting in an ocean surrounded by wealthy countries with research vessels, we have never observed its most fundamental behavior. What we have is scraps. A handful of old records describing females carrying embryos, with numbers around 10 pups, each perhaps 40 centimeters long at birth. That is the basis, not a study. A few observations, some of them ancient, repeated ever since, because there is nothing better to repeat. It is believed the eggs hatch inside the mother and the young are born live, which is normal for sharks of this kind, and that belief rests on almost no direct evidence. How long is the pregnancy? Unknown. Some have speculated it might run for years. That is speculation, and it should be labeled as such every time it is said. Where does it happen? Unknown. And think about what has to happen before any of it. Two of these animals have to find each other. A half-blind, 1 kilometer-an-hour shark has to locate another half-blind, 1 kilometer-an-hour shark of the opposite sex, ready to breed, somewhere in a black ocean that is mostly nothing, almost certainly by smell, because there is nothing else on board that could do it. The same chemical map that finds a dead seal has to find a living mate, in a population thin enough that individuals may go years without meeting one another at all. Nobody has watched that either. It is one more part of this animal's life that we know must be happening and have never once seen. The missing nursery is the biggest hole of all. Newborn Greenland sharks are almost never caught. A 40-centimeter pup in that ocean is a small dark object in a volume of water so large it defeats the imagination, and we have essentially no idea where they are. Not roughly, not which fjord, which depth, which season, which continent's shelf. A large predator that has been fished for centuries and studied for decades, and its birthplace is missing. Sit with the imbalance for a second. This animal's genome has been sequenced. We can read its DNA, letter by letter, billions of them. We have its genetic code, and we cannot find its babies. That is not a joke about scientists. It is a statement about the ocean. Sequencing a genome requires one tissue sample and a laboratory. Finding a 40-centimeter shark in the Arctic Deep requires searching a volume of black water the size of a continent, with the wrong tools, for something that has no reason to be where you are looking. The genome was easier. The genome was much, much easier. Now put the reproduction numbers together and watch what they do. Roughly 10 pups on the evidence we have. Compare that to almost anything else in the sea. A cod releases millions of eggs, a halibut, hundreds of thousands. Those species treat their offspring as a lottery ticket bought in bulk and expect nearly all of them to die. This shark makes about 10, possibly after a pregnancy measured in years, once it has spent a century and a half getting ready. That is not a lottery ticket. That is a hand-built object. And a population made of hand-built objects has a property that should stop you cold. It cannot respond. There is no burst of reproduction available. There is no good year, no boom, no recovery spike. If something removes 1,000 adults from that ocean this decade, the replacements are not decades away. They are a century and a half away, and they have not been conceived yet. And the animals that were going to conceive them are the ones that got removed. There is no rebuilding this on any timescale that means anything to us. Not our lifetimes, not our institutions, not our countries. Which brings up something worse, and it is a point that gets missed almost every time this animal is discussed. Generation time is the clock evolution runs on. Every adaptation you have ever heard of happened because generations turned over. Variation appears, gets tested, and either passes on or does not. And the whole engine only moves when animals breed. Bacteria adapt to our medicines in years because they turn over in hours. Insects adapt in seasons. Large mammals take thousands of years. This shark's generations are measured in centuries. So it does not just recover slowly, it evolves slowly. Whatever pressure arrives in that ocean, this species cannot answer it. It cannot adapt to warming water on a schedule that matters. It cannot adapt to fishing gear. It cannot adapt to us at all, ever. Because by the time selection has had 2 generations to work with, we will have done 400 years of whatever we are going to do. The animal's greatest strength and its total defenselessness are the same trait seen from 2 directions, but that is the next problem, and it is coming. Here is the one that comes first, because there is still something in this body that does not add up. Spend a century and a half before you breed in an ocean that will feed you rarely and hurt you occasionally, and the margin for error is 0. You cannot afford a body that wears out at 80. You cannot afford failing organs, accumulating damage, cells that stop working the way ours do. Everything about this schedule assumes an animal that arrives at 150 in working condition, and then keeps working for another 250 years after that. Almost nothing in biology does that. Bodies break down. That is the default. Time damages tissue, and the damage builds, and the animal declines and dies. It happens to mice in years, and elephants in decades, and us in a century, and the process is so universal that we treat it as a law of nature. This shark appears to be ignoring it, and the reason may not be the cold at all. Start with what aging actually is, because almost everyone has it wrong. It is not a clock. There is no timer in your cells counting down to a number somebody set. Aging is damage. Every second you are alive, your own chemistry is chewing on you. The oxygen that keeps you running produces reactive byproducts that break things. Your DNA takes hits constantly, thousands of them a day, from radiation, from chemistry, from mistakes made while copying itself. Proteins misfold and tangle. Cells divide until they can't, then hang around leaking inflammatory signals into the tissue around them. Your body fixes almost all of it. That is the only reason you are here. You are being repaired continuously right now at a rate you cannot imagine. Almost all of it. The gap between damage and repair is the entire story, and the gap never closes. That is why the risk of dying does not stay flat as you get older. It climbs, and it climbs in a specific ugly way. Past early adulthood, your chance of dying roughly doubles every 8 years or so. Not adds. Doubles. That curve is why nobody reaches 200. It is not that something kills you at the end. It is that the odds turn against you exponentially, and exponential curves do not negotiate. Now run that curve for 4 centuries and see what happens. It does not survive contact with the shark. Take the human doubling rate and extend it, and by the 3rd century, the chance of surviving another year is so close to 0 that the calculation stops being meaningful. An animal cannot live 400 years by having a body like ours and simply being lucky. Luck does not beat an exponential. Something in this shark is either producing far less damage or repairing far more of it. And finding out which is why laboratories that have never cared about sharks care about this one. The easy answer is sitting right there, and it has been sitting there since the beginning of this story. Cold. Damage is chemistry, and cold slows chemistry. Run a body at 1 degree instead of 37, and everything decelerates, including the reactions that wreck you. Add the near-zero metabolic rate, which means less oxygen processed, fewer reactive byproducts, less internal wear. It is the oldest idea in the field. The rate of living theory: burn slower, last longer. Every animal gets a certain amount of chemistry, and the ones that spend it slowly stretch it out. It fits this shark perfectly, and that is exactly why you should distrust it, because the theory is broken, and biology has known it for decades. Take a rat and a pigeon, similar size. The pigeon runs hotter, burns more oxygen, and works its metabolism harder than the rat by a wide margin. And if the theory held, it should burn out in a fraction of the time. It does the opposite. Rats get a few years. Pigeons can go on for a couple of decades. Bats are worse for the theory. A small bat has a metabolic engine that should destroy it in 3 years, and some species live past 30. Naked mole rats have unremarkable metabolic rates and live an order of magnitude longer than mice of the same size and appear to barely age at all. Metabolic rate is not destiny. Slowing everything down helps. It does not deliver 4 centuries, so the cold buys time, and then something else has to do the actual work. Which shifts the whole question. Stop asking how this animal avoids damage. Start asking how it fixes it. And here the story gets very interesting and very uncertain at the same time, so hold both. The Greenland shark's genome has been sequenced, and what came back is peculiar. It is enormous, one of the largest of any shark, and a huge share of it is repetitive junk, the same sequences copied over and over. Sequences like that are not neutral. They are transposable elements, stretches of DNA that copy and paste themselves around the genome. And every time one lands in the wrong place, it can break something important. A genome loaded with them is a genome under constant internal attack. And alongside that, reports of expansions and duplications in genes associated with DNA repair. The hypothesis, and it is a hypothesis, is that these two things are connected. An animal carrying a genome full of self-copying hazards is under permanent pressure to build better repair machinery, and the machinery it built to survive its own DNA may be the machinery that lets it survive 4 centuries. Be careful with that. Finding extra copies of repair genes in a genome is not the same as demonstrating that they work better. That is a lead. It is not a mechanism. Anyone who tells you we have found the reason this shark lives so long is telling you a story that the evidence has not yet earned. Now, the part that should be bothering you already, because it is a much bigger hole: cancer. You may have heard that sharks do not get cancer. It is false. It has always been false. Sharks get cancer, tumors have been documented in them, and the myth did enormous damage because it launched an industry selling ground shark cartilage as a treatment and got a great many sharks killed to fill jars with something that does not work. Discard the myth, and the real problem underneath it is far more interesting. Cancer is a numbers game. Every time a cell divides, there is a chance of a mistake. More cells and more divisions mean more chances. So a large animal should get more cancer than a small one, and a long-lived animal should get more than a short-lived one. And by that logic, whales should be nothing but tumors and mice should be fine. The opposite is true. Big animals do not get proportionally more cancer. It is a genuine unsolved puzzle in biology, and different animals appear to have solved it in different ways. Elephants carry extra copies of a key tumor-suppressing gene. Bowhead whales appear to have their own arrangement. Now line the Greenland shark up against that. Enormous body. Vast number of cells. 400 years of those cells dividing and being copied. On paper, this animal is a cancer generator with no equal. It should be a walking tumor by year 100. As far as we can tell, it isn't. As far as we can tell is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, and it deserves the emphasis. Nobody has run a survey of tumors in Greenland sharks worth the name. We have a handful of dissections and a lot of absence. An absence of evidence in an animal we can barely find is not evidence of anything, which is the honest bottom of this entire chapter. The phrase you will see attached to this shark is negligible senescence. It means an animal whose risk of dying does not rise with age, that does not decline, does not wear out, and simply keeps going until something external kills it. Not immortal, just not deteriorating. It has never been demonstrated in this species. Think about why. To show that an animal does not senesce, you have to follow individuals through time and watch their mortality rate stay flat as they age. You cannot do that here. You cannot follow a Greenland shark for 2 centuries. There is no researcher, no institution, no funding body, no nation that lasts long enough to run the study. The experiment that would answer the question takes longer than the civilization asking it. There is a second irony in that. The reason anyone funds this work at all is us. Aging is the thing we most want to understand and least know how to touch. And an animal that looks like it has beaten it is worth serious attention. So we are studying a 400-year fish using tools built by a species that struggles to plan 4 years ahead. What we have instead is a set of very large, very old animals that appear to still be growing and appear to still be breeding, when by every rule we understand they should have fallen apart hundreds of years ago. So the truthful statement is smaller and stranger than the headline. This shark is not a solved problem. It is a question with a body, swimming around in freezing water, carrying an answer we have not been able to get out of it, while medical researchers who have never been on a boat read its genome, hoping something in there applies to us. And whatever the mechanism turns out to be, its result is visible from the outside, in the plainest measurement anybody could take. You do not need a laboratory to see it. You need a tape measure and a very long wait, because this animal grows at roughly 1 centimeter a year. And that number does something to the shark that nothing else in this story has done yet. It stops being an animal. It becomes a record. Look at your thumbnail. The width of it, side to side. That is a year. That is what a large Greenland shark builds in 12 months of being alive. 12 months of swimming, hunting, digesting, and existing. And the entire physical result is about 1 centimeter of shark. Do it again next year, and the year after that. 100 of those, and you have added a meter. Be precise about it, because the number gets thrown around carelessly. Growth is faster when the animal is young and slows as it gets larger, which is normal for almost everything alive. The famous figure, roughly 1 centimeter a year, describes the big old animals, the ones that have already been at it for centuries. Even the quickest phase of this shark's life early on is measured in a couple of centimeters a year. There is no point in its existence where it grows at a rate you would call fast. A human child adds more length in a month than a Greenland shark manages in a year, at any stage of its life. Now ask why, because slow growth is not a personality trait. It is an accounting result. Growth is spending. Every centimeter of that body had to be paid for in protein and energy, and every gram of that protein had to come out of a meal. And you already know what the meal situation is. Food in the Arctic deep arrives by accident, rarely from directions nobody can predict. An animal cannot build faster than its supply lines allow, and this animal's supply line is a dead seal falling out of the dark whenever the ocean feels like it. So the growth rate is not a choice the shark made. It is the ocean's answer, written in flesh, 1 centimeter at a time. The cold set the metabolism. The metabolism set the demand. The food set the ceiling. And what came out the other end is an animal that builds itself at the speed of a glacier. And that produces something no other large predator on Earth has. Its body is a clock. Think about what that means. In almost every animal you know, size stops telling you anything about age very quickly. A full-grown wolf is a full-grown wolf, whether it is 3 or 9. Growth finishes, the body stops changing, and the information disappears. That is why aging a mammal takes teeth, and aging a fish takes otoliths, and aging a tree takes a saw. This shark never stops. It keeps adding slowly, apparently for its entire life, at a rate so low that size and time stay locked together across centuries. Look at a 2-meter animal and a 5-meter animal, and you are not looking at a small one and a big one. You are looking at 2 different centuries. Lay that against history, and the effect is difficult to shake off. Put a tape along a 5-meter shark, and across most of that length, every 10 centimeters is roughly a decade. Somewhere along that flank is the invention of the telephone. A little further, a world war. Further on, the first aircraft. The animal grew through all of it without registering any of it, adding a fingernail's width a year, while everything above the surface went insane. And it is not only length. The body accumulates. Scars, bite marks, the pale record of things it has fed on and things that tried to feed on it, layered over one another for 2 or 3 centuries with no urgency about healing. The copepods on the eyes are their own kind of clock, generation after generation of parasite living and dying on the same face. Nothing about this animal ever gets cleaned up. Whatever happens to it stays on it. What comes up alongside a boat is not just a fish. It is an archive with a tail. Now the bigger reversal, the one this entire story has been building toward, you have been told, since the first minute of this, that this animal is a predator that gave up speed. That framing is useful, and it is also wrong, because it assumes the shark is playing the same game as everything else and playing it badly. It isn't playing that game at all. Look at the ocean around it. Cod spawn in millions and die young, betting everything on numbers. Seals get maybe 30 years and spend them at full speed. Orcas hunt in coordinated groups 60, 80 years, brilliant, ferocious, and gone. Every one of those animals is competing. Faster, smarter, more offspring, more efficient, out-hunt the neighbors, outbreed the losses. That is what life normally looks like, and it is exhausting, and it is what evolution is usually about. The Greenland shark is not competing with any of them. It is not trying to be faster than a seal. It is not trying to out-hunt an orca. It is not trying to outbreed a cod, and it could not if it wanted to. It has removed itself from the race entirely and is doing something else on a different axis that none of those animals can follow. It is outlasting them. Every one of those competitors is a temporary event from the shark's perspective. An orca pod arrives, hunts, ages, and dies. And the shark is still there. A cod population booms and crashes, and the shark is still there. A seal colony rises and collapses over decades, and the shark is still there. At 1 kilometer an hour, at 1 degree, waiting for whichever of them dies first. It does not need a good year. It has centuries of years, and any of them will do. It does not need to win. It needs to not be finished. That is why this animal is so hard to categorize. It is not the apex predator of the Arctic in the way we mean the phrase all teeth and dominance. It is closer to a permanent feature. The other animals in that ecosystem are weather. This one is landscape. And a strategy like that is beautiful, and it has exactly one requirement. The world has to stay still. Every part of it depends on that. Growing for a century and a half before you breed is only survivable if the ocean will still be there and still be the same in a century and a half. Producing 10 pups is only survivable if the adults keep going for centuries and centuries of small contributions accumulate. Costing almost nothing to run is only an advantage if the thing you are waiting for eventually arrives. Every element assumes continuity. For millions of years, that was the safest assumption in the sea. The Arctic deep does not do drama. It has been cold and dark and slow since long before any of this animal's problems existed. And a body tuned to that stability would have been the most sensible design on the planet right up until it wasn't. Because stability, for this animal, is not a bonus. It is a dependency. And here is the last thing the growth rate does. And it is the part that should sit badly with you. It makes damage invisible. Think about how you would notice a population of these sharks collapsing. You would not. That is the honest answer. Kill the adults, and the survivors are still swimming, still big, still turning up on lines, still looking exactly like a healthy population. Because the animals that were going to replace them are not due for a century and a half, and their absence produces no signal anybody can see. There is no crash. There is no sudden drop in numbers. There is no year where the fishery notices. A collapsing population of 400-year animals looks identical to a stable one for a very long time. It looks fine. It looks fine right up until the last of the old adults dies. And then it does not look like anything, because there is nothing left to look at. We have never had a good way to count them either. Nobody knows how many Greenland sharks exist. Not roughly, not within an order of magnitude worth defending. So put the animal back together one last time before the last act. A body running at the temperature of the sea. A nose doing all the work. Eyes it never needed. A liver holding it up for free. Chemistry that lets it work at depths that stop other fish. A mouth that takes anything the ocean offers. A century and a half of childhood. 400 years of life. 1 centimeter a year. There is one word underneath all of it, and the word is time. Not slowness, not weakness. Time, used as a strategy by an animal that decided the way to survive a hostile world was to move through it slower than the world could hurt it. For millions of years, that worked. Then something fast arrived. 2 things, actually. One of them has engines. The other one is heat. Picture a deck in the North Atlantic. Gray light, a winch running, a long line coming up out of cold water with halibut on it. That is the point of the trip. That is what the boat is for, what the crew is paid for, what the market wants. And then something else comes over the rail. 4 meters of gray, blunt, sagging animal, hooked by accident, worth nothing, wanted by nobody. Nobody on that boat set out to catch it. Nobody profits from it. It is in the way. It gets unhooked, or cut loose, or dumped, and the line goes back down, and the day continues. That animal may have been born before the boat's country had a flag. This is how it ends now. Not a hunt. An inconvenience. The liver fishery is history. Nobody is dropping lines through holes in the ice for lamp oil anymore. What replaced it is worse in a specific way, because you cannot argue with it, and nobody involved is doing anything wrong. Greenland sharks are caught constantly as bycatch, in the halibut fisheries, in trawls, on long lines, right across their range, in numbers that are hard to pin down and are certainly not small. They are not targeted. They are collateral. Some are released. Some come up dead. Some are released in a condition that makes the word release generous. And because they are worthless, nobody counted them carefully for a very long time. There is one piece of good news in that, and it comes straight from the liver. Most deep fish hauled to the surface are killed by the trip itself, because the gas in the swim bladder expands and destroys them from the inside before they ever reach the deck. This shark has no swim bladder. Oil does not expand. In principle, a Greenland shark brought up and put back has a real chance of swimming away, which is more than almost any other deep-sea animal gets. How many actually survive it? Nobody has established. That work has not been done at any scale. Now watch what happens to every single adaptation in this story when a boat shows up. The nose that reads the ocean's chemistry, that finds a carcass 2 kilometers downstream, that made this animal the most efficient scavenger in the Arctic, finds a baited hook and cannot tell the difference. The greatest sensory instrument in the Northern Ocean, pointed straight at a long line. The patience that let it wait out famine means it will approach anything that smells like food because there is no reason not to. Nothing in 400 years taught it that food can be a trap. The slowness that made it silent, that let it drift up on sleeping seals without pushing a single wave ahead of it, means it cannot leave. There is no bolt, there is no burst. Whatever happens to it happens at 1 kilometer an hour. The lack of a fight, the absence of any capacity for violence beyond a slow roll, means it comes up quietly. It does not thrash. It does not break gear. It is the easiest large animal in that ocean to pull out of it, exactly as it was a century ago. The chemistry that fills every cell of it, the urea and the TMAO that let it work at depth, the compounds that will put a man on the floor, do nothing to a trawl net. And the eyes never mattered anyway. Every trait that made this animal untouchable for millions of years is, in front of a boat, either useless or actively helpful to the boat. The whole design inverts. That is not bad luck. That is what happens when a body optimized for one world is handed a different one. Now the arithmetic, because this is where it stops being sad and starts being serious. For fast-breeding species, fishing is survivable. Kill cod, and the survivors spawn millions of eggs. And the population can climb back, given room. The whole idea of sustainable fishing depends on that. Take some, leave enough, let the boom refill the hole. For late-maturing, slow-breeding species, that logic collapses completely. When it takes a century and a half to make an adult survival is the only thing that matters. There is no boom, there is no refill. Every adult removed is a hole that stays open for 150 years minimum, and any extra mortality, even a small one, even an accidental one, subtracts faster than the species can add. We have run this experiment before, and we know how it ends. Orange roughy, a deep-sea fish that lives well over a century and matures late. Bussechte fished commercially starting in the 70s. The fisheries found the aggregations, took enormous catches, and collapsed them inside a couple of decades. Populations that had been accumulating since before anybody had electricity were removed in less time than it takes to raise a child. Sturgeon, slow and late, hammered across the northern hemisphere. Sawfish, gone from most of their range. Every one of those animals had the same profile: long life, late maturity, few young. Every one of them looked robust right up until it wasn't, and then did not come back, because coming back was never an option their biology offered. The Greenland shark is the most extreme version of that profile on the planet. And remember what the last chapter told you about detection. This is a species where damage is invisible. You will not see the decline. The sharks coming up on the lines will keep being large, because the large ones are the ones that are still alive, and their size will keep suggesting a healthy population, and the animals that should be replacing them will not exist, and nobody will notice the not existing, because you cannot count something that was never born. By the time it becomes obvious, the fix is 150 years out. There is a second thing accumulating in these animals, and it comes from the same principle as everything else. Nothing in this body gets cleaned up. Industrial chemicals released decades ago, the long-lived pollutants that work their way up food chains and settle in fat, are found in Greenland sharks at high levels. Mercury, too. That is not an accident, it is inevitable. Put a large predator with an enormous fatty liver at the end of every Arctic food chain, and let it run for 4 centuries, and it becomes an archive of everything we have ever put in that ocean. The same tissue that holds it up is where the contaminants go. What those loads do to the animal, honestly, nobody knows. It is very hard to study the health of a fish you cannot follow. And then, the temperature. The Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet, by a wide margin. It is the fastest changing region on Earth, and it is changing at a rate measured in decades. Look back at everything this animal is. The metabolism is set by water temperature. The energy budget is set by the metabolism. The food demand is set by the budget. Warm the water and that whole chain moves in one direction. The shark needs more, in an ocean that does not produce more just because it got warmer. Be careful here, because this is where the drama outruns the evidence. Nobody knows how this plays out. These sharks already move through a range of temperatures, and there is deeper, colder water available. And the honest position is that the effects on this species are not established. It might shift its distribution. It might do worse. It might do something nobody predicted. What is not uncertain is the timescale. The Arctic is being reorganized in decades. This animal takes a century and a half to produce a single adult and hundreds of years to turn over a generation. Whatever the change is, it will arrive many times faster than the species can answer, and there is no evolutionary response available at that speed. That is not a prediction about warming. That is arithmetic about generations. So here is the reframe, and it is not the one you expect. This animal is not fragile. It never was. It is the most durable vertebrate we know of, built for a world where nothing changes, and for millions of years, that was a perfect reading of the situation. Its slowness was not a weakness. Its patience was not passivity. Every strange thing about it was a correct answer to a very hard question. Then the question changed, in a single human lifetime, and the answer did not, which leaves one obvious response. Protect them. Regulate the bycatch, restrict the gear, close the areas that matter, guard the breeding grounds. Except you cannot protect what you cannot find. We do not know how many there are. We do not know where they breed. We have never located a nursery, never watched a birth, never counted a population with any confidence. And it turns out we may not even know where they live. Because in the last few years, this Arctic animal has been turning up somewhere it has absolutely no business being: Belize. A baited camera goes down off the coast several hundred meters onto a deep reef slope in the Western Caribbean. Warm water above, coral above that, tourists above that. This is not a place anybody was thinking about Arctic animals. Something comes into the light. It is large, it is gray, it is blunt-nosed and heavy, and it moves the way this entire story has taught you to recognize, which is to say it barely moves at all. It arrives out of the black, takes an interest in the bait, and drifts back out of the frame. A sleeper shark. In the Caribbean. Be honest about what that is and what it isn't. The identification is not certain. It may be a Greenland shark. It may be a close relative in the same group. It may be a hybrid, because these animals do interbreed with their Pacific cousins, and a hybrid does not have to look like anything in a field guide. Anyone who tells you a Greenland shark was definitely filmed in Belize is going further than the evidence goes. Now watch how little that caveat helps. Even at its most conservative, even hedged into a corner, that footage does something to the map that cannot be undone. It says one of these animals, or something extremely close to one, was sitting on a reef slope in the tropics, thousands of kilometers from the ice, doing exactly what it does off Greenland. And the reason is the same reason everything else in this story worked. It never left the cold. Here is the thing about the ocean that almost nobody carries around in their head. Warm water is a skin. It is a thin, heated layer floating on top, a few hundred meters deep, kept warm by sunlight. And underneath it, the entire planet is cold. Go down far enough at the equator, in the Caribbean, off Indonesia, anywhere at all, and the water sits at a few degrees above freezing. It is the same water. It is the same temperature the shark lives in off Svalbard. The tropics are not a barrier. The tropics are a lid. So this animal did not wander somewhere impossible. It stayed in its habitat the entire time. The habitat just happens to run under the warm parts of the world, connected, continuous, dark, cold, and enormous, all the way from the ice to the equator, and out the other side. And Belize is not alone. There are older records, thinner and easier to overlook. A Greenland shark reported from deep water in the Gulf of Mexico, others from deep water off Portugal and the Azores. Individually, each one is easy to wave away as a stray, a mistake, an oddity in a logbook. Stack them beside a camera on a Caribbean reef slope, and a pattern starts to suggest itself. And the pattern is not that these animals are wandering. It is that we drew the boundary in the wrong place, which turns the whole idea of an Arctic shark inside out. That name was never a fact about the animal. It was a fact about us. Think about where our information comes from. Every single thing in this story arrived through a hole we happen to be looking through. The stomach contents came from a liver fishery, hauling sharks up in Greenland and Iceland, because that is where boats were. The age came from bycatch handed over by fisheries working northern water, because that is where the fleets are. The parasites, the chemistry, the growth curves, all of it collected in the north, because the north is where we were standing. We fish the Arctic, so we find them in the Arctic, and we drew a line around the place we were standing and called it their range. Where we do not fish, we do not find them. And we recorded that absence as their absence when it may only ever have been ours. The hybrids make the point sharper. Greenland sharks and Pacific sleeper sharks produce mixed offspring, which is a small sentence with a large implication. Two species separated by an entire continent and half a world are meeting somewhere, often enough to breed, and we do not know where that happens, or how often, or what it means for either species. So how far does this animal actually go? Nobody knows. It could be a northern specialist that occasionally strays. It could be a deep water animal with a range spanning oceans, a permanent inhabitant of the cold layer that covers most of this planet, which we mistook for a regional curiosity because we only ever looked at one end of it. Both are live possibilities. That is not a failure of science. That is what the ocean does to knowledge. And it is worth stopping on how thin that knowledge really is. Almost everything in these last 2 hours came from dead animals. The lens dating needs an eye, and the eye needs a body. And the bodies came off decks. The stomach contents came from carcasses. The chemistry came from tissue. We know this species through the ones we killed deliberately for centuries, accidentally ever since, and the living animal in its own environment remains largely a rumor we have confirmed a handful of times with a camera. We have never seen them mate, never seen one born, never found a nursery, never counted them. We are not sure where they live. We are sure of one thing, and it is the strangest of the lot. They were here first, and they will be here after, and the entire history of our understanding of them fits inside a single one of their childhoods. Sit with that. Modern marine science, all of it. From the first serious deep-sea expeditions to the sequencing of that genome, spans roughly a century and a half. That is not a long time. That is exactly how long a Greenland shark takes to become an adult. A pup born the year we started properly studying the ocean would still be too young to breed. Everything we think we know about this animal was learned in less time than it takes one of them to grow up. That is the reframe this story has been walking toward from the very first minute. You started with a slow animal, something almost comic, drifting through black water at walking pace, half blind, full of poison, going nowhere. Slow, in the way we use the word, meaning inadequate. It is not slow, we are brief. Every measurement we have of it was taken inside a window narrower than its adolescence. every conclusion we have drawn is a snapshot taken by a species that gets 80 years, of an animal that treats 80 years as a rounding error. The 400-year figure has error bars because we are trying to measure something that operates on a timescale our institutions cannot survive. We are not observing this animal. We are glimpsing it from inside a life so short that it is not really compatible with the question. And here is the thing that makes it worse and better and impossible to shake. That shark is doing this right now. While you have been listening, somewhere in that water, an animal born before your country's laws existed is drifting through the dark at 1 kilometer an hour, tail beating once every few seconds, a parasite hanging off each eye, waiting for something to die within reach. It has been doing it since before your language sounded the way it sounds now. It will keep doing it after everyone you have ever met is gone. It does not know about any of this. It does not know we found it. It does not know we named it, dated it, poisoned ourselves eating it, hauled up its relatives by the tens of thousands, and read its DNA. None of that reached it. It is still down there, doing the only thing it has ever done, which is continue. So end where these things always end. A narrow beam of light in black water, hundreds of meters down, cold, silent. A circle a few meters across, and outside it nothing you can see. Something moves at the edge of the beam, gray, enormous, unhurried. It passes through the light without reacting to it, without speeding up, without any indication that the light means anything at all, and then the tail goes out of frame and the water closes behind it, and the beam is empty again. That is the whole relationship. That is all we get. A narrow circle of light held up for a few seconds in a system the size of a planet, pointed at an animal that was already old when the technology that made the light was a fantasy. And the honest ending to this story is not a fact. It is a question that gets worse the longer you look at it. We know how old they are. We still do not know where they go.